Thomas and Elena Harper looked like the perfect couple in every holiday photo. But behind those matching smiles lay secrets so dark that when Elena was found dead in their quiet suburban home, Thomas was already out laughing with his mistress, spending the insurance money meant for his children, and living a double life that would leave an entire community asking how far a man would go to keep having fun while hiding the truth of murder. Thomas and Elena Harper lived in a quiet cul-de-sac where children played on their bikes, and neighbors waved to each other while mowing their lawns. Their house was painted a soft cream color, with a small porch where Elena often placed potted flowers that she cared for every morning. Everyone believed they were a happy, peaceful family, and from the outside, it looked like they had everything anyone could want. Thomas drove a reliable pickup truck with his business logo on the side, while Elena picked up the children from school and took them to soccer practice or piano lessons. On weekends, they would have family movie nights, and Thomas would post carefully selected photos of them eating popcorn or decorating the Christmas tree. Smiles stretched wide for the camera, but there were moments Elena would stand in the kitchen, staring out of the window as she washed dishes, wondering why Thomas had stopped looking at her the way he used to. She noticed that he had started leaving early in the morning, saying he had jobs far out of town, and returning late at night, sometimes with excuses about a pipe bursting at a client's house or an emergency call from a customer who paid well. For after-hours work, Elena would try to stay awake, waiting for the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway. But many nights, she would fall asleep on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand, hoping he would call to let her know he was safe. The calls rarely came, and when he did call, it was quick, with Thomas telling her not to worry, that he was just busy providing for the family. Elena felt herself drifting into a routine of caring for the children, cleaning the house, and pretending everything was fine. During church gatherings where people would comment on how lucky she was to have a hard-working husband, she would nod and smile, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. Thomas, meanwhile, started spending more money, saying it was for expanding his business, but she noticed small changes that didn't fit the story. A new watch appeared on his wrist one day, and when she asked about it, he brushed it off as a gift from a satisfied client. Receipts for expensive dinners and restaurants far from town were tucked into his work pants, and he would snatch them away when she tried to pick up the laundry. There were nights when Thomas came home smelling like perfume that Elena didn't recognize, and he would claim it was from a client's house or the soap in a gas station bathroom. The excuses piled up like the dishes she washed every night, and the silence in their bedroom grew heavier. Elena started writing in a small blue notebook she kept hidden in her nightstand, documenting her concerns with shaky handwriting after the children went to bed. She wrote down every detail that made her feel uneasy, from the mysterious phone calls Thomas would take outside to the late-night showers he took before crawling into bed without a word. She noticed the security cameras Thomas had installed around the house had stopped working, and when she asked him to fix them, he said he would get to it when he had time. But weeks passed, and they remained dead. Neighbors noticed that Thomas rarely looked at Elena during family barbecues, often standing on the edge of gatherings, distracted, looking at his phone or stepping away to take calls. Elena, trying to hold the image of their family together, would serve drinks and manage the children, while Thomas barely participated. There were moments when Thomas would suddenly become affectionate in front of others, kissing Elena on the cheek, squeezing her shoulder, as if to prove to the world, and maybe to himself, that everything was normal. But once the guests left, the house returned to its quiet unease, with Thomas slipping into the garage to tinker with tools, while Elena cleaned up alone, her heart heavy with the suspicion that her perfect family was quietly falling apart while everyone else believed they were living a dream. Thomas had first met Carly when he came to fix a leaking sink at the repair shop where she worked, and it started with small conversations about how her day was going and how she was tired of her long hours behind the counter. Carly was younger than Elena, with bright hair. She often tied up with colorful bands, and she laughed at Thomas's jokes in a way that made him feel important again. At first, he told himself it was just harmless, that it was nice to have someone look at him with admiration. But soon, he found himself finding excuses to drop by the shop, even when there was no work needed, bringing her coffee and lingering to chat while she checked in customers. The first time they met outside of work, it was at a small diner off the highway, where they sat in a corner booth. Thomas telling Carly about how tired he was from the constant pressures of providing for a family that didn't appreciate him. Carly listened, leaning forward, nodding, her eyes wide, telling him he deserved to be happy. It was in that moment that Thomas felt a dangerous shift. A sense of permission to want more than the life he had at home, a life that felt heavy and ordinary. They began texting late at night, Carly sending short, flirty messages that made Thomas smile as he lay beside Elena, who was asleep, unaware of the secret life beginning to grow in the dark. Soon, Thomas was spending money on cheap motel rooms, telling Elena he was staying overnight for a big plumbing contract in a nearby town. At the motel, Thomas and Carly would share takeout meals, sitting close on the bed, watching television with the volume low while they laughed about shows they barely paid attention to. Carly would talk about her dreams of leaving town, of starting over somewhere warm, somewhere she could open a small shop of her own. And Thomas would tell her he could help her, that he wanted to be part of that future. Every time Carly would worry that they were doing something wrong, Thomas would reassure her that he was planning to leave Elena soon, that he just needed time to sort out finances and protect the children from a messy situation. But Thomas never left Elena, and weeks turned into months as the affair deepened. Carly began to feel anxious, wondering if Thomas was lying, but he kept her quiet with small gifts, slipping her envelopes of cash, paying for her car repairs, and once, buying her a bracelet with small blue stones that matched the earrings he had once given Elena on their anniversary. Thomas justified each purchase in his mind, telling himself he deserved to be happy, that Elena would understand eventually. Meanwhile, at home, Elena began noticing money missing from their joint account, and Thomas would dismiss her questions, claiming the funds were tied up in a new business opportunity. Carly didn't know that Thomas had started shifting money around, pulling small amounts from savings accounts and transferring them into an account she didn't know existed, one he planned to use when they finally left together. He would sit in his truck in the motel parking lot after leaving Carly's room, staring at the dark road, breathing heavily, trying to convince himself that he was in control. But he could feel the weight of the lie growing heavier, the split between his quiet suburban home and the small motel room where he laughed with Carly, widening into a chasm he wasn't sure how to cross. Every morning, he would return home with cheap coffee, stepping inside the quiet house, pretending he was exhausted from work, while Elena watched him with careful eyes, noticing the changes in him that he believed he was hiding. It was a Tuesday morning when Elena's body was found in their bedroom, the sunlight creeping through the curtains onto the unmade bed where she lay, motionless and pale. The children had already left for school, unaware that the last goodbye they gave their mother would be the final one. Thomas claimed he had been out for an early job, leaving before dawn to handle a plumbing emergency in a nearby town, but a neighbor's security camera caught his truck returning to the house just after sunrise, a detail Thomas did not know existed when he called 911, his voice shaky as he told the dispatcher that his wife wasn't breathing. The paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing to be done, and the house became a blur of flashing lights and hushed voices. Neighbors gathering outside in small clusters, whispering with worry. Thomas stood on the porch, his hands trembling, his eyes darting from the paramedics to the curious faces watching from across the street. He told them it was an accident, that Elena must have fallen, and when he came home, he found her on the floor, her body twisted in a way that looked unnatural. But the details didn't add up. The bruises on her arms and the small marks near her neck didn't match the story of a simple fall, and the blood near her mouth seemed too fresh for the timeline Thomas gave. When the investigators arrived, they moved through the house, taking photographs of the rooms, the hallway, and the bed where Elena had been found. The children's toys were scattered near the living room. The kitchen sink still had last night's dishes stacked inside, and the coffee Thomas had bought that morning sat untouched on the counter. They noticed the security cameras outside were not functioning, something Thomas explained away by claiming he had been too busy to fix them. But it added to the growing list of questions that swirled around the quiet home. Elena's phone was found hidden under the bed, and on it were unsent messages addressed to her sister, messages where she wrote about her fears, saying she felt something was wrong, that Thomas was not the same man she married. In one of the drafts, Elena mentioned that if anything happened to her, someone needed to look at Thomas, that she felt watched in her own home, that she found receipts she didn't understand and smelled perfume she didn't wear on his clothes. These words were enough to make the investigators pause, to slow down and look deeper into the scene they were standing in. The blue notebook Elena kept hidden was discovered in her nightstand, each page a quiet record of her suspicions, of the missing money, the late nights, the lies that built up like dust in the corners of the home she once loved. She had written about her plans to confront Thomas, to tell him she knew about the lies, and she hoped they could fix it, that she could forgive him if he would just tell the truth. Those words would never be spoken, leaving only ink on pages, as evidence of her final thoughts. While the official report initially leaned toward an accident, the unease in the small community continued to grow. Whispers in the grocery store aisles and during church services began to paint a different picture. One of a man who smiled too easily after the death of his wife, of a family that was not as perfect as it appeared in the photographs framed on the walls. Thomas returned to the house each night, walking through the rooms, pretending everything was normal. But the silence of the home began to feel heavier as the investigation quietly continued in the background, gathering the fragments of the truth hidden beneath the surface of the perfect suburban image. After the funeral, Thomas wasted no time returning to his routine, but it was clear to those watching that something was different about the way he moved through the world. Less than 3 weeks after Elena's death, he was seen in town, sitting across from Carly at a diner, sharing a slice of pie, the two of them laughing as if nothing had happened. Carly wore a new dress, her hair styled carefully, and she tucked a strand behind her ear while smiling at Thomas, who looked nothing like a grieving husband, as he paid for their meal with cash, avoiding the use of the card that Elena used to check the statements for when she was alive. The neighbors began noticing Carly's car parked outside Thomas's house late at night, sometimes staying until morning, while the curtains remained drawn in the front windows. Some of the neighbors tried to tell themselves that Thomas was lonely and needed companionship, but others whispered about how quickly he moved on, how wrong it felt to see a new woman in the home where Elena had once cared for her children and arranged fresh flowers on the dining table every Sunday. The children were confused, asking their father why a strange woman was making them breakfast, why she was sitting on their couch watching TV in their mother's robe, and Thomas simply told them that Carly was a friend who was there to help them all heal. But Carly was not there just to help, and Thomas was not grieving as he claimed. They went out to dinners in nearby towns, avoiding places where too many people would recognize them. But it was impossible to hide completely in a small community. People saw them in parking lots, Thomas's hand on Carly's back as they walked to the car, laughing in the aisles of discount stores while buying snacks and drinks. Carly started wearing jewelry that seemed too expensive for her receptionist's paycheck. Small gold rings and delicate necklaces that Thomas bought her, the same way he once bought Elena gifts to keep her happy when she started asking questions he didn't want to answer. Thomas sold the family home quickly, using the story that it was too painful to live there, that the children needed a fresh start. But the truth was that the house had become a reminder of the questions hanging over him. A place where the silent eyes of neighbors made him feel watched each time he stepped onto the porch. He moved with Carly into a newer apartment in a different part of town, paying rent in advance using funds that had come from Elena's life insurance, money that was meant to secure the future of his children, but instead was used to buy new furniture and weekend trips with Carly to lakeside cabins where they would drink wine by the water and take photos that Thomas would carefully avoid posting online. Meanwhile, investigators continued working quietly, reviewing the insurance policies Thomas had taken out on Elena's life only months before her death. The sudden shifts in account balances and the internet searches that showed Thomas looking up ways to stage accidents and how to ensure someone would not wake up after being given certain substances. Carly, wrapped in the illusion of a future with Thomas, remained unaware of the depth of the darkness beneath his calm exterior, thinking she was stepping into a new life with a man who loved her, never realizing that she was part of the story that would soon collapse around them both as the truth of Elena's death continued to surface. Thomas was leaving a steakhouse with Carly when the officers approached him, their presence sudden and quiet, hands resting on their belts as they asked him to step aside for questioning. Diners turned in their seats, forks pausing in midair, as they watched Thomas's confused face shifting into something pale and thin, his eyes darting around as if searching for a way to slip away unnoticed. Carly's face drained of color, her hand reaching for Thomas's arm, but he pulled away, his mind racing through the details of everything he thought he had hidden so carefully, everything he believed he had control over. The arrest was quiet, but heavy, the click of handcuffs sounding louder in Thomas's ears than the chatter in the restaurant or the scraping of plates. Carly watched as he was led away, tears gathering as she realized she didn't truly know the man she had been planning a future with, the man who had bought her jewelry and whispered promises of a new life. As Thomas was placed in the back of the police car, he glanced back at Carly, standing under the restaurant lights, her hair moving in the warm night breeze, the woman he believed was worth destroying everything for, and for a moment, his face twisted, unable to hide the fear clawing up his throat. The station. The investigators laid out the pieces of the case, each fact a nail in the coffin of the life Thomas had built on lies. They had evidence of the insurance policies taken out on Elena shortly before her death, policies Thomas signed under the guise of protecting the family's future. They had the internet search history from Thomas's phone and computer, late-night searches on how to make a death look accidental, and how certain substances could leave a person unable to fight back. They had the footage of his truck returning to the house that morning, far earlier than he claimed, and the witness accounts of neighbors who heard a thump and a muffled cry during the time Elena was supposedly alone. Most damning of all was Elena's journal, her careful notes about the changes she noticed in Thomas, her fears that he might hurt her, and her last message to her sister that she felt something bad was going to happen. These words, written in shaky ink late at night while the children slept, became the voice of a woman silenced too soon, refusing to let her death become another cold statistic. Thomas tried to deny the charges, telling the police that Elena's death was an accident, that he loved his wife. But the evidence painted a different story, a story of greed, betrayal, and a man who valued his desires above the life of the woman who trusted him. Carly, shaken and pale, was brought in for questioning. She confessed to knowing about the affair, but swore she had no knowledge of any plan to harm Elena. Investigators believed her, and in exchange for her cooperation, she provided details about Thomas's spending, his moods, and the things he would say late at night when he believed he was safe with her. She told them about the promises of a new life, about how Thomas had used Elena's death money to pay for their weekends away, about how he laughed with her as if nothing had happened while the ashes of his family remained cold and unburied. In court, Thomas sat in his suit, his eyes empty, as evidence was presented, as neighbors testified about the cheerful facade he wore, and as financial records and internet searches were displayed on screens for the jury. It did not take long for the verdict to come in: guilty of murder. Thomas was sentenced to life in prison, leaving behind 2 children who would grow up knowing their father chose his desires over their mother's life. The home where Elena once placed flowers on the windowsill was sold. The pages of her journal, kept safe by her sister, a reminder of the truth she tried to leave behind. The community moved on slowly, the whispers fading, but the memory of Elena's gentle smile remained in the minds of those who saw how quickly a perfect family could shatter, how secrets, greed, and betrayal could turn love into a weapon, and how the quiet darkness within a man could destroy everything around him, while he smiled for the world to see.